Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Windows on the World. Yes, we've had a few weeks off these live streams. I've been doing a lot of shows actually on RBN, which is Republic Broadcasting Network in America, and it's 8 p.m. UK time, which is Tuesdays and Thursdays. Now, this Monday, I'm going to be doing a show at 3 p.m. on RBN, Republic Broadcasting Network, and that's at the Mike Rivero show. Mike Rivero's away, so they've asked me to take over and do Monday. So if you'd like to join us then, please do. But yes, the pandemic fizzles out and now the fake revolution begins. That's the kind of subject of tonight's show. I've got John Waters from Ireland, who has taken on the Irish government over the draconian laws which are locking down the whole world at the moment. And I've also got Lark in Texas. And Lark is an expert on that word which nobody seems to speak of. Communitarianism. It is actually the system that we're living under at the moment. It's a hive mind, and you're either with us or you're with the terrorists. In other words, if you are against the accepted norms which are inflicted on us by the state, the hive mind, then you are the enemy and you will be dealt with accordingly. So yes, we're looking at really the multi-agency infiltration of everything. This is what we're talking about. But the thing is, over the past 2 months, what I can say is there's never been a dull moment. There's been a lot of dullards, but never a dull moment. But yes, I just wanted to fill you in on a few of these things. Recent shows we've done, actually, which you can see on YouTube, but please go to Spreaker. Spreaker is the platform that we broadcast our Sunday shows on, and those go out at 9:30 p.m. on a Sunday. Our recent shows, yes, Global Takedown End Time Syndrome. I had David Shaler on there as a guest. David joined me, and that was quite an interesting one. We talked about what's going on and some good perspectives there. There's another one called Lies Go Viral for the Common Good. And of course, we've done loads of stuff on the COVID-19 agenda, covering it in so much detail that I don't think we need to go into any of that tonight. But yes, we did another one called Smart Agenda, Human Harvesting, Rules for Robots, the Global Coup. I'm sure many of you will listen to them. But these Sunday shows are actually packed with information. And of course, we try and make them a bit entertaining as well. But news just in. London police to deploy facial recognition cameras across the city. Yes, when the camera flags an individual, police officers will approach and ask them to verify their identity. Do you have your immunity passport, sir? If it says if they're on the watch list, they'll be arrested. Now, this is interesting because I had Crime Stoppers Most Wanted in the UK taken down pretty much completely, and everyone in Kent removed because the police were abusing that. So with facial recognition and the police acting sort of out of control and under their own authority, with the complicity of the state, what could possibly go wrong? Well, I'll leave that for you to work out. But yes, we've had Boris meeting with Bill Gates at the Great Vaccination Summit. Yes, their noses are all in the trough. And protesters staged a die-in outside Dominic Cummings' house. Now, this is actually making me embarrassed to be the same species, but hopefully I'm not the same species as the people who did a die-in outside Dominic Cummings' house. It says they were holding signs and wearing face masks. About 20 campaigners lay on the street outside the North London home of the Prime Minister's controversial advisor on Thursday evening. One of the placards read, "Over 50,000 dead while you're playing King of the Castle." Last month, Durham police said Mr. Cummings' trip to Barnard Castle might have been a minor breach of the lockdown rules, but added they had no intention of taking retrospective action. The police acting half sensibly for once. Who would have thought? Campaigners said they all remained 2 meters from each other during the 30-minute protest. They said the response from the street was largely positive. Now get this, with about 15 neighbours joining them and one leading a chant of Black Lives Matter. Okay. It's no laughing matter, you know. But I think this adequately sums up the fall of civilization. Who would have thought the end times would have been this embarrassing, though? And we have been covering this over the past few weeks. I hope you can all hear me out there. Yes, it looks like we're going live and everything's okay. Whenever we do these live streams, we always have problems before we go on air. That's why they're usually a bit late. It's not because we're being fashionably late and keeping you waiting. It's because everything goes wrong just before we go on air. I was talking to John, perfect. He gets back on. He sounds like he's two minutes away. Okay, then Larkin, Texas, same thing, all perfect earlier on. So we had to reset. Oh, a reset. We had to have a global reset. And now I think everything's okay. So yeah, the George Floyd autopsy, this is interesting, report, it reveals that he's actually a coronavirus survivor. So I think this is kind of really the meme of the moment, isn't it? Whatever you die from, it really doesn't matter. It has to be COVID-19 related. But it does say that George Floyd had tested positive to COVID-19, but was an asymptomatic carrier without lung damage, according to a new report from the Hennepin County Medical Examiner. Chauvin, this is the police officer who's meant to be allegedly kneeling on his neck. Now, the thing is about this story is when you look at what it's instigated, you have to question the whole thing, because there's a very strong point I wanted to make here. That all this Black Lives Matter stuff, which is the same as Antifa, which is Soros Inc., which is the fake revolution. Well, the thing about it is, have any of these people actually brought up the fact that more black people have been murdered with knives in the last 2 years than probably in the last 10 years, right? So you've had this knife crime epidemic in London where hundreds of black teenagers have been randomly killing each other over things like postcodes and territory. But none of that has been mentioned. That's how you know that this Black Lives Matter protest is absolutely 100% fake, right? Absolutely 100% fake. But it says there is, oh yeah, there's also some doubt as to the authenticity of the incident. That was a note that I made earlier on. But really, this is just a catalyst for the global action plan. That's all it is. It's good to see, though, that some people in Ohio have taken to the streets with assault rifles to protect their shops and the customers from Antifa and the BLM brigade. But in the new normal, the new normal, Soros and co, their army can be triggered at any time. And that's what's happening. It's organized. It has a public and private face. The very important thing about these Antifa, Black Lives Matter, these created lobby groups, they are there to be triggered whenever necessary, and they are part of the deep state. They are absolutely supported by the police. Obviously, anyone who was protesting against the lockdown, the very few of them were all arrested and surrounded by the police. When Black Lives Matter stroke Antifa stroke Soros decide to riot and loot in the streets, it's suddenly okay, isn't it? Did you see what they were doing in Downing Street? Throwing cones and bricks at the police over the Downing Street gates. They actually got the police out of the front of Downing Street and they hid behind the gates. So you could say this is a kind of revolutionary act, and then they go on about people's social distancing. So as we know, it's all part of the pantomime. But basically, all of these people is cannon fodder. They are for the global agents of change. They're the Bolsheviks who are working for the bankers. That's all they are. So yes, Hyde Park protest against lockdown. Yeah, last few shows on RBN, Windows on the World, covered all that. Just going through a few notes here. The UK government, though, might be stuttering its way through the COVID comedy, as we know. But get this, World Localization Day is on the 21st of June. Even, get this, the Dalai Lama has put his 2 pence in. Would you like to hear what the Dalai Lama had to say? This is the person who was found in a Tibetan village and is the new voice of Buddhism. Okay, let's see what he had to say. Of course, there is no way to return to those old ways of living, but the lesson we can learn from the past is to act locally, even while thinking globally. Wait a minute, that sounds like something I've heard before. Is it in the Tibetan Book of the Dead? No, it's part of the United Nations Global Action Plan. Even Lady Gaga said it the other week, didn't she? She said, think global, act local. Guess what that is? Communitarianism. Guess who's going to be talking about that on the show tonight? Yes, us. Okay. So, yeah. Oh, yeah, I've got getting on to more important things now. HRH, Prince of Wales, Prince Charles. He said there is a golden opportunity to seize something good from this crisis. Oh, So even Prince Charles is saying it's a beneficial crisis. Okay, global crises, he says, know no borders, and highlight how interdependent we are as one people sharing one planet. Wait a minute, we're one people sharing one planet. Well, I don't think his version of communism is kind of working, is it then? Yeah, a minute. But that's again a UN word salad. So Prince Charles has been implanted with a UN word salad through the World Economic Forum. He must have been having lunch with Bill and Melinda Gates, the World Health Organization, and JP Morgan. I wonder if he has. But he has 5 outlined points here. Now, of course, Prince Charles is absolutely the go-to person for the environment, isn't he? You know, ever since he was hugging trees, he's just loved it. Maybe he should have stuck to that, really. Talking to trees and plants as well. That was one of his things, wasn't it? Yeah, I made that joke the other night, though, on RBN, but I'm going to say it again. You know, when Charles met Camilla, I was actually there. Do you know what he said to her? He said, "Marry me, Camilla, and I'll never look at another horse again." Okay, the 5 points he outlined were to capture the imagination and will of humanity. Change will only happen if people really want it. Now, what he's saying here is an absolutely communitarian statement. We all want the same thing. We don't want to be negative, do we? Change will only happen if we really want it. How much do you want change? I bet you want global change, don't you? Well, actually, I don't. I want to be the one that's left behind. Yeah. Why am I so full of hate? I don't know. He said the economic recovery must put the world on the path to sustainable employment, livelihood, and growth. Where's he been for the last 2 months? Long-standing incentive structures that have had perverse effects on our planetary environment and nature herself must be reinvented. Well, what does that mean? Smart city gulags, poverty for all, rationing for everyone, and complete control by the state. He says systems and pathways must be redesigned to advance net zero transitions globally. Now, who put that into his highly inactive and minuscule brain, I wonder? Couldn't have been the UN 2030 Global Action Plan, could it? You know what? I think it might be. Basically, he says carbon pricing can provide a critical pathway to a sustainable market. Has he been talking to Mark Carney, the climate-related disclosures fund? Has he been talking to them, do you think? Or have they been talking to him? I think it's more likely they've been talking to him, really, isn't it? He said science, technology, and innovation need reinvigorating. Humanity is on the verge of a catalytic breakthrough that will alter our view of what is possible and profitable in the framework of, guess what? Come on, you know, don't you? A sustainable future. Well, he says investment must be rebalanced. Accelerating green investment can offer job opportunities in green energy, the circular and bioeconomy, eco-tourism, and green public infrastructure tourism. How's that going to happen? Charles' speech was part of a launch event for the Great Reset. This is the COVID-19 Beneficial Crisis Global Action Plan, a project involving the World Economic Forum and the Prince of Wales. Oh, yes, he's got his nose in the trough. The Prince of Wales's Sustainable Markets Initiative, aimed at rebuilding the economic and social system to be, guess what? More sustainable. The Great Reset will be convened by the World Economic Forum in January 2021. Well, if no one's going to be left behind, are we all going to be invited? Well, I think we should be, don't you? The initiative grew out of the forum's COVID action platform. This is the post-COVID world, the post-truth world and the post-COVID world. Yes. He said the third priority of a Great Reset agenda is to harness the innovations of the fourth industrial revolution to support the public good, especially by addressing health and social challenges, which means privatization of the health, organ harvesting, of course, social challenges, meaning putting you into a smart city, putting you on universal credit. Supporting the public good means that you don't have to know about it if it's important. Anything that's important is not in the public interest. It's not for you to know about. Yes, imagine that. Smart cities, surveillance, cashless transactions, universal credit, no escape from the AI system and global poverty. Thanks, Charles. That's really sustainable. They also explore, get that you're going to love this one. They also explore why LGBT plus inclusion is the secret to cities' post-pandemic success. Yes, 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 of course. It's got to be, that's got to be the key to success, hasn't it? The LGBT plus inclusion initiative. That's got to be what's driving the success of the post-modern, post-industrial world, isn't it? It's got to be. Can't be anything else, can it? Yes, to use created groups to police anyone that says anything factual. That's what they mean by that. It says, talking of inclusion, oh, yeah, that's right, the Hyde Park and the neo-morons. So we've got the neo-morons versus the people who want to go out. And the neo-morons are the ones who are allowed out. Is it because they wear face masks, I wonder? I wonder why that is, yeah. Maybe that's what it is, because you're only going to be allowed onto public transport after the 15th of June if you've got a face mask. So wait a minute, that's Antifa and Black Lives Matter. They're already sorted, aren't they? No, they have been thinking ahead. I thought for a minute this was all spontaneous. Okay, so yes, that was all about that. Yes, earlier. Oh, I've got to get onto this. It says, you know, this Star Wars actor, this John Boyega, he said he made an emotional speech to fellow protesters in which he said the crowds were a physical representation of our support. Well, I suppose they would be if they were there, wouldn't they? Do you know what I mean? If people are watching this, I suppose that's a representation that maybe they support what we say. Some of them might not do, but he had a captive audience, didn't he? Because he's a Star Wars star, isn't he? Apparently, but he says along with Mr. Floyd, along with two other Black Americans who controversially died. When I die, I'm going to die controversially, you know. In the US, and Stephen Lawrence, they can never forget about that one, who was killed in a racist attack in 1993. Now, the thing is about this Stephen Lawrence thing, yeah, is again, why don't you hear about all these other kids that have been knifed to death? Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. But of course, it's him and his virtue, it's his virtue signaling mother and father that get invited everywhere like useful idiots because they'll say the right thing. They're not going to get up and get angry about anything that's actually going to solve anything. That's why they use them. Do I sound cynical? I don't know. But it says here, oh, yes. Yeah, he said he was speaking from his heart, this Boyega bloke, from his heart, and he did not know whether he would still have a career after speaking out. Wait a minute. No, virtue signalling in Hyde Park about an issue which is part of the deep state is not going to stop you getting any work. Speaking about something controversial may not get you any work. I mean, ask other people who've been kicked out of Hollywood. What you were doing, Mr. Boyega, is a massive career move. It's like the George Clooney School of Understatement. That's what you were doing. But yeah, guess what? Who would have thought it? Virtue signalling arseholes the world over were queuing up to congratulate him on his self-promoting, vacuous, narcissistic non-speech. They included, wait a minute, let's have a look who was there. J.K. Rowling, Jordan Peele, some other useful idiots. They praised his emotional speech at a Black Lives Matter protest in London on Wednesday. Guess what he said, John Boyega? Black lives have always mattered. So profound. We have always been important. We have always succeeded regardless. Okay, fine. Meanwhile, Meghan Markle stated that Floyd... Oh, yes, Meghan Markle. Do you ever remember her, that B-movie actress? Yeah, Meghan Markle. She said that life mattered. She said that Floyd's life mattered. Well, it's quite ironic, really, because according to the Queen, her life doesn't matter at all, does it? No, it doesn't. Today, she said, today's about innocent people who were halfway through their process. Process? We don't know what George Floyd could have achieved. Okay. We don't know what Sandra Bland could have achieved. Well, that's true, I suppose. But today we're going to make sure that won't be an alien thought to our young ones. He said, well, that was John Boyega, yeah. Anything to, but yeah, again, doesn't mention anything to do with the gang warfare that's been going on for 2 years and the hundreds murdered in that. He didn't mention the genocides in Gaza and Yemen either. Oh, no, he didn't mention them. Self-congratulatory wretch. He said, I need you to understand how painful it is to be reminded every day that your race means nothing. That happens to me every day. My race doesn't mean anything. Does your race mean anything? No, doesn't mean anything, does it? Unless you make a bloody big issue out of it and start virtue signalling. It doesn't mean anything, does it? It doesn't mean anything. What does it matter where you've come from or who you are? Doesn't matter. It's what you're doing that's important, isn't it? These identity politics ridden fools are just vacuous, aren't they, really? But yes, no wonder the end times are here. After living through I've lived through a respiratory virus pandemic. Yes, we're going to be talking about communitarianism. We're going to be talking to John Waters in the first part of the show. We're going to be talking about John and Gemma O'Doherty taking on the Irish government and getting kicked in the teeth. That's what we're going to be talking about, something actually important. We're going to be talking about how the state is rubbing people's noses in it now, how the state has awarded costs against John Waters and Gemma O'Doherty. Unlawful, but apparently legal. Yes, we've done many shows on this. We're going to be talking about the whole caboodle tonight. So I'm going to introduce John. I think I've got the right mouse here. Let me see. Yes. John, hi. Hi, John. Can you hear me? Unmute your microphone.
Yeah, okay.
That's it. I love it when people have microphone etiquette, John. It's very, very good.
Very important, very polite to unmute your microphone before you speak.
I think so. That's it, John.
So,
and you're a man of immense knowledge and immense manners. So first of all, tell us about what happened when you went back to court, what's been happening recently, how you've been denigrated in the press, and how costs were awarded against you. Can we go into that first?
yeah, well, actually, they're all connected, all these phenomena, because essentially you're dealing with the same monolith, the same force. The press, the courts, the government, the whole shebang, the globalist cabal, they're all the same side. I mean, they're just different headings, which have really little meaning. So the court, just to go back to the procedure, we applied ex parte to obtain leave for judicial review of the legislation about the lockdown. So, and our imperative in that was to show that this was unconstitutional, and all we had to do, as we understood it and as everybody understands it, is to, in a sense, to mount a prima facie case that there is unconstitutionality, which isn't a very high bar, as you can imagine. It's a straightforward matter. Very often these things are done on the nod. They just look at your papers and say, yeah, that's got an arguable case, let's go. And they set a date for a hearing. But instead, they brought in all the other parties. The judge brought in the other parties. We've had 3 judges along the way, but they all acted in concert. And so we have all the respondents in, we have all the notice parties, the Parliament and the Minister for Health and the Attorney General and whatnot. And so instead of actually having a discussion about whether we have an arguable case, we're essentially in the midst of the substantive issue. And the court is behaving, the judge is behaving as if we have to have expert witnesses, scientists, doctors, etc., when in fact we're at still a preliminary stage, a leave hearing. And you see, he counts on a number of things in this. One is that he's cleared the court. You know, the court is unconstitutionally is being cleared of members of the public. So that's fundamentally against the Constitution. I mean, the Constitution expressly says that the court hearings must happen in public unless we're provided for by law. There's no law. So he tells us that, well, the press, this is the funny part, the press act as really representatives of the public. I say, you got to be joking. And he said, no, I'm not joking. And I believe that part because he has no sense of humor. So we were on our own, really, and on this one. So then he can simply, so when he did his judgment, he shot us down. And he did a number of things, kind of a Tommy Cooper act, conjuring act, you know. He inverted the onus of proof. So instead of it being up to us, up to the government to come in, the respondents and the various actors in the process of enacting this legislation, instead of it being up to them to actually answer the question of constitutionality once we had established it, and you know, it's conceded in his judgment that there is unconstitutionality, that the Constitution is breached, that the rights of the people are breached. At that point, it's up to the other side to come in and show what is their justification. Was it necessary? Was it proportionate, etc., etc.? these questions were never explored. And yet in his judgment, he says that we didn't prove that it was disproportionate. Well, we didn't even try, nor were we asked to, nor ought we have been asked to. So this is, but he knows, you see, that he can put out all this guff, and that the media, who absolutely hate us because we hate them for sure, because they're utterly, profoundly corrupt, that they will just simply laugh it all up. And he dumps in then loads of little bits of tidbits of abuse, where he takes out of context things that we said off the cuff as we're on our feet, and suggests in his judgment that this was the substance of our case. As little analogies. For example, at one point, I cited Lord Sumption, the former judge of the British Supreme Court, who had said on one occasion that the lockdown in the United Kingdom was the worst episode of intrusion on civil rights and human rights in the United Kingdom ever, and much worse than anything that happened during World War II. And so I simply threw that in passing. And he makes a big deal of it, as if, he's quoting something that's got nothing to do with the Irish Constitution and a judge in a foreign jurisdiction and all this stuff. So that's the kind of opportunistic nonsense that he engaged in. Now, look, this is entirely predictable. The judge in question was appointed to the High Court by his mate, the Minister for Justice, 5 days after the Minister of Justice took office in 2017, I think it was. And so that's what you're up against. That's what you expect. So the cost thing, likewise. I mean, it's a very clear principle of constitutional law that the public have a right, citizens have a right to challenge legislation at any moment if they feel that there is something unconstitutional. That's a sacrosanct right. And when you apply ex parte, you really exclude the possibility of costs. That's fundamental. That, in other words, if you can then show you have an arguable case, in other words, that there is a possibility of unconstitutionality, you are freed from the burden of costs thereafter. But by bringing in the substantive questions into the preliminary hearing, he then he fixes with cost as a way of fining us, in effect, fining us as an example to other citizens concerning making such challenges, taking such challenges to the government in the future. So that's essentially what so this week we were fixed with the cost. I don't know what it's going to be. I don't care, because we're going to go on anyway, and we are going to either win the case or shame the entire apparatus of the state. And I don't really care which it is, but we are going to go on, and we're not going to be deterred. And I do believe that by the time we get to the final stages of this process, that the entire climate of this will have changed, and that people will then begin to see what is actually afoot here.
Yeah, that's great, John. Sorry, I was just looking at the chat there. I was taking in everything you were saying. What I was going to bring up was that it's a very good idea to, question the costs and look into that. I won't say too much about that on air, but I think that's a really good idea. And it's something that is essential, I think, when you're moving forward with this, because like you're saying, they didn't actually address the main points of the issue because they can't do that. They can't be seen to do that. But what I think is the worst thing about all this is the derogatory manner in which they treated you. In other words, they treat you with contempt and not respect.
That's right.
That is the main issue, because it's like having the jackboot in the face, you see. It doesn't matter whether you're being attacked by these stupid Soros-led idiots or the courts. It's the same kind of treatment. In other words, you're idiots, your tinfoil hat conspiracy theorists, get out. Well, no, that's not the argument.
You see, it's very important that this is done in concert between the judge, the court, and the press, because we made it clear. Look, it's a joke to say that the press represent the public interest here. They don't. They report selectively, and they did. And he knew how to feed them lines that they would report. So, the idea that there's something. But the point about this, he knows as well as everybody else knows that both Gemma and I used to work in the Irish media, and we both left in circumstances which left us utterly disgusted with the nature of the culture of journalism after, in my case, well over 30 years as a journalist, in Gemma's case, over 20 years. And, I wrote a book about it, which the press censored. They absolutely suppressed any references to the book. Like, this is a profoundly corrupt edifice, much more so, I think, than the United Kingdom press or the American press, which is, they're both pretty bad, pretty, squalid in lots of ways. But this is total. And it's probably a kind of a portent of the future of the press everywhere in the world, if we have a press at all. So, this is what we bought into. We know we're dealing with profound corruption, and we know that it is total corruption. And the question is, we don't really we have only one choice, really, either to do or not to do. Because, it's not a question of that we can choose between, various gradations of corruption and choose the lesser. The corruption is total. So we either just choose to do something or do nothing. And doing nothing is not an option, given that our country is on the line now. Our country is almost destroyed already. And if this kind of stuff goes on for another few years, it will be unlivable for the people who have been reared in it and who've regarded it as their country for years or decades. Like myself, like my friends, like my family, like everybody, and yet most of those people are utterly silenced, utterly cowed, and terrified of opening their mouths. They're terrified even of the association with people like me, because that will draw the wrong kind of attention on them. Not necessarily official attention, but the kind of busybody attention that goes along with all of this, the kind of snitch culture that has been created out of this. And I think that's kind of being really ramped up in this particular crisis of COVID-19, that now people are being coached in the same way as in communism in the East, in Eastern Europe and in communist Russia, to become actors on behalf of the state and to regard their neighbors and indeed their families as potential enemies. And so that's kind of the situation we're in culturally and legally, and it really amounts to the same thing.
Absolutely correct. That's really what we're talking about on a lot of our shows. The way that the narrative is controlled in every sector. It's multi-agency, it's across everything. It doesn't matter whether you're dealing with the police, the council, or any public-facing institution. The people in there have all been trained in the same way. And that is what a lot of people don't get. And what we're going to be talking about with Lark in Texas tonight, because this is something that I've noticed how things were usurped about 15 years ago. We saw how the police training had changed. We saw how people in local authorities would stop engaging with you, the removal of all public liability, and the introduction of the change agent, the useful idiot, the person who's trained beyond their mental capacity, but they're given a lot of power. This is for a very good reason, because those sort of people act on their egos. They're very greedy, they're very selfish, and they're extremely easy to control. And the group which is called the British, the group, no, I'm not talking about people from England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales here. I'm talking about a group called the British with their psychological system, Tavistock Institute, all the rest of it. No, it's not conspiracy theory for all the people who've been listening to the BBC. This is how the BBC was created. It was created out of intelligence. It was all created out of military intelligence. Everything in Britain, which is part of the system in Britain, was created out of British intelligence. I'm not talking about the law system. I'm talking about how the actual governance system works. Now, there's a big difference between a government and governance. Governance is a totally different thing. And we can see what governance is when we look at our government, how Boris Johnson, Grant Shapps, Matt Hancock are reading from a script and being instructed from above. So Boris is looking very sheepish, like he doesn't believe a word he's saying. Previous to that, he would bullshit for Britain. But now he can't even do that because it's even beyond his moral
Well,
code to do
he's
that, and
like
that's saying something, because I don't think
he,
he's got that much of a moral
he
code. But yeah,
he reminds me actually of, it's like those, whenever I see him on now doing a statement, it's like those videos you see of kidnap victims who are put on us in front of a camera by their captors and told what to say. And they say things like they're speaking to their family, say, I'm okay, just send
yes,
the money, and that's kind of what you get with Boris, like, just, I'm okay, I'm still here, just do whatever they say, just don't do anything,
no, no, no.
don't
You
do
see,
anything
the thing
sudden.
is, John, I was, yes, yes.
Yeah, but
I'm just laughing. I
this
was,
is
John. I was under a lot of pressure. You see, I was under a lot of pressure, John, because yes, they were going to behead me. They know they
yeah,
meant it. They meant it.
yeah, that's right, that's right. Well, but this is very strange. I mean, there's a number of very strange aspects to this whole thing, and now we're kind of, as you said earlier, moving beyond the COVID-19 phase. But that has created a certain series of impressions and, like, expectations, that this idea of the new normal, whatever that means. But you can see already what it will mean, that people are already talking among themselves in a manner expectantly of a certain change in culture. And the thing is, you keep being told things that are going to happen, whether it's about creches, children at school in pods, or like we had a new law coming in there last week in Ireland, or announced about traffic speeds in various parts of Dublin City, and you kind of think, well, what has this got to do with COVID-19? And does it mean if you're driving over 30 kph that the virus will find its way into your car through the radiator, or something like that? But you see, what's very interesting about this is that people have now already been coached not to question this once it's about COVID-19. And the second thing is then that you're hearing all this thing, and then you suddenly think of this phrase, which I've kind of kept at the back of my brain for, just to remind myself and anybody I'm talking to intermittently, it's the flu. It's the flu. And therefore all this is about the flu. And everybody said, oh yeah, I forgot it was the flu. But yeah, you're right, it is the flu, yeah. But it doesn't seem to matter. Nothing seems to matter. They can tell you now in plain sight that they're actually fiddling the figures, and they do. They describe how they're fiddling them. Like, they don't make any secret of it. They just say, we basically put down COVID-19 for pretty much any death. We just steal corpses here, there, and everywhere, and we call them COVID-19 deaths. That's what we're doing. They make no secret. And this is a very interesting, because people are already now in this sheep-like mode where they accept any nonsense, because the logic, not that they're even scared anymore, maybe to some more and more, less people are scared now than were scared a month or 6 weeks ago, but they now are prepared to actually tolerate anything. I'll give you an example. I live close to the sea here in Dublin, in South Dublin, Dunleary, in Sandycove, and there's a beautiful little beach, a tiny beach, but it's one that's totally, on a hot summer's day, all the mums and bring their kids there after school, and it's absolutely chock-a-block, like shoulder to shoulder, and people park their cars right on. There's a stretch of road leading to the beach, and now this road is a kind of a loop road that goes nowhere, it just goes around in a circle. But they've put down, in the last couple of weeks, they've put down 150 yards of cycle lane right where the people park their cars. They've taken away the parking places. And I'm looking at this. This cycle lane joins up with nothing before itself or after itself. It just stops. It starts in midair and it stops. And you're looking at it, you think, what is the point of this? Well, the point of it really, Mark, is to communicate to the people that their needs no longer will be considered. That nobody will use this cycle lane. That's obvious. There's no point in it. Doesn't, because it's for cycle lanes are generally for people going home from work, or they're for power cyclists, to plow along and
well,
bang.
John, this is all part of Agenda 2030. You see, what's happened is this beneficial crisis, this COVID-19, is nothing to do with what's going on. It's just they're using it as a catalyst to bring in the more draconian measures. So the cycling thing is a huge part of it, because the cycling, well, you live in Ireland, so you know that you need a car, right?
Yeah,
rural communities need cars. So
sure.
how are rural communities going to survive when Varadkar bans all the cars by 2030? How are the farmers going to survive? They're not. That's the point.
Well,
The whole
I'm
point of
hoping that
this. Yeah.
I'm hoping that long before 2030, the Irish people will ban Varadkar. So,
Yes.
like
Well, it'll be
sometime
gone soon. So I'm sure. Yeah.
in the next 30 days, hopefully, like, I mean, these are the slime of the earth that we have ended up with, our so-called leaders. They are absolutely unspeakable people. They are cowards. They are bullies. They are messenger boys. Fundamentally, they're not, as you said, they're not actually carrying out any will of their own. They're just simply reading off pieces of paper which have been handed to them. They have no brains. They have no principles. They have nothing that cannot be bought or and sold. So, but you're right. But it's also at the level of, I think, a deeper and dirtier level, that part of this is this necessity to say to people, because we kind of, particularly people of a certain age, over a certain age, you know, cling, as it were, to certain, as it were, old-fashioned ideas. That, when I speak about Ireland, I speak about my country, and they say, "Sorry, what did you say? My country? Oh no, not anymore. This is not your country. This is a piece of ground that we are disposing of as we please. Now you can continue to live here if you behave yourself, but please don't start repeating things like that anymore. But it's your country. That those days are gone." And that, in my view, the cycle lane is as much about that as it is about anything else. It's signaling to people. It's arbitrary. It's random. But that's what we will do from now on. And we won't ask your permission. And we won't listen to you when you say it's nonsense, because it's not nonsense. It's a signal to you. And that's a very necessary thing, to let people like you know to keep your mouth shut from now on. That's kind of, I think, what it means.
Yeah. There's also an element in this of constant change to destabilize people's minds. That
Mm.
was part of something that's been planned since the 60s, really. We've actually covered that. There was a
Yeah.
lecture by a Dr. Richard Day, and everything that's happened since then is happening now.
Yes,
But
I remember
yes,
that. Yeah.
the global action plan is the same in every country, and we're living in the fourth world wilderness. This was adequately described in 1992 at the Rio conference, a series of conferences in Denver, Colorado. And there you can listen to a man called George Hunt, and he outlined what was going to happen. And he died in 2013. And he's got a website called thebigbadbank.com, and you can listen to his videos. You can actually watch them on YouTube. Look at Unsaid, the elite plan well ahead. And you will hear Edmund de Rothschild on there. You will hear bankers talking about the population as cannon fodder, and how do we communicate this to them in a simple way that they can understand. The simple way that they can understand, which sounds good to them, is sustainable development. Who can argue with that? This is a war of words, as Larkin, Texas calls it, mimetic warfare. It's exactly what it is. The words that people are using have been absolutely dumbed down, and they don't mean what people think they mean. They usually mean the
Yeah.
opposite.
But
Diversity means monoculture. Vibrant means dull. Empowered means absolute slavery.
yes,
So
they mean
these
they're
are,
Orwellian.
yes,
They're Orwellian wrote words, But what I can't really understand about this, and really, maybe you can help me, Mark. But in a certain sense, I am old-fashioned, and I have never. It has never really made sense to me when you have a free society, which is free in an easy way. I mean, Irish society was like really, free and easy. Uh, it was never a problematic society. It was never a difficult society to run or organize. Uh, why should people want to impose these kind of controls on a people who are already entirely malleable to a high degree, and who simply want to get on with their lives, rear their families, live a happy, free, and easy life? Why would they want to destroy the quality of those people's lives, and for what purpose? First of all, the second thing is then that when you look at where this is most likely leading, to a form of communism, well, we know where that ends. We've seen the experiment in the Soviet bloc, and we know it's disastrous. Now, it strikes me as very odd that the same politicians that we were listening to, including Boris Johnson, Leo Varadkar, all these people, all of their lives they talked about nothing else except some kind of topic related to economics. They don't know anything about economics, most of them, but they talk about growth and about productivity and these things. And these are the only things that appear to be in their little heads most of the time. And now they're prepared to surrender all of that in the interest of something else, in the interest of something that will lead eventually, if our understanding of what happens with communism is correct, and it appears to be. There are no examples in the world, extant examples of anything different, that it will lead fundamentally to economic disaster, possibly in the short term. And for the life of me, I am not able to get my head around these concepts, like, because it seems to destroy everything that they have been in politics and counting as virtue and counting as achievement on their own behalf in politics. Now they're prepared to dump all that and apply an entirely different set of criteria.
I'm not sure, John, that that's the case, because if you look at Boris Johnson's background, when you talk about these people who've come out of these so-called elite education systems, they often have a different view anyway. A lot of these people were very involved with eugenics. I think if you look at it, Boris Johnson's father certainly is. I mean, they have a dim view of the lower classes. They have a dim view of a lot of other people. And that is because they were brought up in a kind of social Darwinistic kind of mode. So they're very competitive. They will crawl over people to get where they want to go. This has been instilled in them through the system. Now, when we talk about elite systems, they're not actually from a real elite system. They're not like a priest class or anything like that. They don't know very much, but they were trained for a certain level within this system. And if you're talking about people like Varadkar, that's just a puppet. That's bought out. It's a bit like Macron. These are soulless drones. These are the useful idiots. But with Johnson, they've had more kind of engagement because of where they come from, in a way. But if you look at what Boris Johnson's done, he's always gone along with this and never questioned it, because it's actually above their pay station. That's the reality. And I think that's the reality of what's hit Johnson, because I don't think that he even realized that governance was so powerful and was so draconian that it could just sweep him along. But he did make a... Sorry, go on.
Well, I mean, it seems to me, maybe I have a very prosaic view of all these things, but it seems to me that this can only be one of two things. Either somebody's stuffed a hell of a lot of money in a Swiss bank account for Boris Johnson, or he's blackmailable on some count or other. I don't see another option for what appears to be, on the face of it, the dramatic change in his personality that I've watched over the last 3 to 4 months.
Yes, I think that he's realized that he's not in charge. But yes, the thing is that all of these people have their noses in the trough. If you go through most of those people, I'm not going to name them all because it's been all in the press, but just look at their interests. Most of them have interests with Bill Gates. Most of them have interests with pharmaceutical companies. Most of them have their nose in the trough at some level. And that is absolutely apparent. You know,
I heard Boris Johnson, exuding praise for Bill and Melinda Gates the other day, and thanking them profusely for some donation they'd given to some vaccination body. I forget the name of it now. It's one of those horrible NGO type things that are taking. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, and he was like really like he sounded like a schoolboy. Now like Bill Gates is a monster, and everybody already knows that. And I'm sure Boris Johnson knows it as well, because he's not a stupid man. But why is he doing this? I mean, that to me was endgame as far as the UK was concerned on this, that until you get rid of Boris Johnson, you haven't a hope in hell of actually getting out of this mess. And there's nobody else on the horizon who isn't worse than Boris Johnson. That's the terrifying thing. And we're in the same situation here in Ireland, that the people we have are all in the same.
Yeah,
they're all
also,
the same.
John, I think,
So they're all the same people.
Also, with Johnson, you have to look at his character. Yeah. With Johnson, you have to look at his character.
Sure.
He's got no integrity. He's not got any integrity to anybody. He never did have. He's a chancer. Oh, what's Bill Gates? He's a chancer who screwed people over, who took other people's ideas. That's all he's ever done. He's a $40 billion chancer. That's all he is.
Yeah.
And he's instructing our government. So that
The only
tells you, yeah.
well, even yet, Mark, it is possible for the peoples of Ireland, of the United Kingdom, of America, of the world to stand up as one person and just shout at the top of their lungs, "No, go now, go." And these people would have to go because there's more of us than there are of them, and we still have that power. But every day that passes now, that power is waning, and we are at severe risk, and our children and our children's children are at severe risk from this, because we are actually, there's no question about it now, that what they intend is a form of extreme tyranny. There's no question about it. Like I have not. I have taken some time to come to that realization for the reason that I said. That I suppose there's a kind of a naivety that comes with complacency, when you live in a free and easy society for a long time, it becomes unimaginable that it could become Orwellian in a matter of days or weeks. But it has. It became Orwellian in a matter of days, in March, and it before our eyes, and we still didn't believe it until Easter, when it actually was put in train, and now people are kind of using language. Newspapers are using language which says, well, we're doing a trade-off now, between a different kind of trade-off between the common good and individual rights, which is, now I remember the same kind of people, scumbags and journalists, the very same people, same bylines, who were sneering at the idea of the common good 20, 30 years ago, when I would talk about it in a different context then, in terms maybe about the distribution of populations between urban and rural, the kind of over loading of cities with population, the thinning out of populations in the west of Ireland, for example, and we'll talk about the common good. For example, that would be just one context. They were disparaging, sneering about that. But now suddenly they have become advocates of something called the common good, which as soon as they start to use a phrase, I start to become suspicious of it.
I think that's a great point, John, and a really good point to bring in Lark. I'd really like you to speak to and meet Lark in Texas, because you've
Sure.
just talked about the common good, and the common good is for the common good of all, but it's what appears to be for the common good of all. It's not for your good. It's not about you having a good life, because you having a good life is selfish. It has to look as though it's for the good of everybody. That's what the communitarian idea is. We're talking about a form of communism, but basically communitarianism was born out of a fellow called John Goodwin Barnby, who popularized the term in 1848. But in 1848, it was thought of as something that meant of a communistic ideal. In 1909, it was changed to referring to a community. And that's what we're talking about, the global community, which is basically a bunch of billionaires and everybody else living in poverty, and them having technocratic control over every aspect of your life. And that's the common good. I'm going to bring in Lark now, so you two can have a chat. Yeah, hang on. Where are we going? Yes, Lark. Yes, Lark. Hi.
Hi, how are you, gentlemen?
Very
Hello,
well.
Lark. How are you?
I'd like you and John to have a chat now for a little while, then I'll come back in.
How are you, Lark? Yeah, I'm nice to meet you. This phrase, this word has been around for a long time. I've never really taken it. I've never been afraid of it. I mean, I remember maybe 30 years ago picking up this thing about communitarianism and thinking it was quite a benign concept, that it is community in the sense of, kind of summoning up the energies of a small community, a village, a town, something like that. Maybe let systems, things like, currencies, localized currencies, trying to pool the energies in that way. And it seems that on that basis to be quite benign. But I think now, from listening to Mark and others in recent times, that was a very naive view of what was actually at the back of it.
Well, it's I think that you're spot on. However simplistic it may appear, you can attach a million words to defining this one word, and it's designed as such, quite honestly. It really is a synthesis of capitalism and communism. But capitalism is also corporatism and mercantilism and or fascism, if you will.
Yes.
Communism embraces things like utopian socialism. It takes on aspects of syndicalism. Many people don't even realize what syndicalism is, but it emanates from the European medieval guild system. It's still in place today. For instance, in the States, Americans think of syndicalists as the Wobblies, for instance, back in the 30s, the trade. Okay, and of course, we understand that there are trade unions in Europe, as there is in America, and in many countries around the world. But what people don't realize is that this trade unionism is not only blue collar, but it is white collar. And for instance, in the States, examples of white collar trade unionists or syndicalists would be members of the bar, the American Bar Association, the National Lawyers Guild, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the National Governors Association. Many of the many people today are organized in different ways. People that work for corporations are organized. They don't see it. We have to understand that the capitalists have a caste system. That would be your shareholders, your board of directors, your management, and your workers or laborers. And so do the communists. And that, starting from the top, that would be the intelligentsia, the nomenclatura, the bourgeoisie, and the proletariat. You know, it may be of interest to the listeners, the viewers today, that the Oxford English Dictionary had a word of the year a few years back, and that word was precariat. And it was cited at a Bilderberger's conference as an important word for these planners, if you will, to focus on. And that would combine the words precarious and the word proletariat. Because what happens in a communist system is the first group that's targeted. If you read any kind of Marxist literature, they always target the bourgeoisie, the people who feel like they have skin in the game, the middle class, if you will. And why is that? Because the end game for the intelligentsia, call them your 1%ers, if you will, is to accrue the assets and the wealth of that particular class, accrue them unto themselves, at which time too they expand the firewall, which is the nomenclatura, just below them in the hierarchy. And why? Because they feel like they need an expanded nomenclatura or bureaucracy to separate themselves from the great unwashed, the hoi polloi, who have now been stripped of their assets, their wealth, and impoverished. And many of them join the ranks of the propertyless and the wage slaves at the bottom, which would be the proletariat. It's also important to note for people that are trying to grasp this concept of communitarianism, and it wouldn't be important, except that it's tied directly to acquis communautaire, or community law, communitarian law in English. We describe it as EU law. This is the law that is being superimposed and overlaid upon all nationalist laws across the world. I think I lost my train there just for a moment, but any thoughts at the moment?
I'm very interested in the whole question of this connection between corporatism and communitarianism and, as you said, fascism. Because as I understood it, Mussolini once used, he said that corporatism was essentially a synonym for fascism. Now, that's kind of a weird idea to our ears now, because we think of fascism in terms of its symptoms, in terms of the aggressive force elements of fascism and the menace of, hordes of gangs of auxiliaries on the streets and so on. But the idea of corporate control, and now we see this taking shape globally, but in Ireland we see it in a particular way because for all kinds of weird reasons, Ireland has become a real hub of corporatism in the world because we have the lowest corporation tax rate in the world. So we attract these guys like flies to cow dung, and they come here tax dodging. And then they start to use Ireland as a kind of a petri dish for all kinds of experiments to do with, governance and things like, I think we're looking at things like social credit, also censorship. YouTube is highly active here, and a lot of their activities are formulated here. And we have this kind of government now, which is really a public-private partnership as opposed to an elected Irish government. It's the corporations telling the government what they want, and join, in addition, of course, to the other external agencies like the EU and the UN, and now the WHO. And so, this all kind of seemed to erupt all of a sudden. I mean, I remember when I heard about, at the time that I was kind of flirting with the idea of communitarianism as a journalist, writing about it, writing columns about it, without, to be honest, now realizing what it was really. I saw it as a reasonably benign thing. It was a time in Ireland before we had the last really big boom, which kind of catapulted us into the big time, as it were, globally. A really bad development, but that was a kind of a time when I was, like, as a journalist, involved, going around the country, talking to community groups about all kinds of things like ecological issues, like somebody trying to impose a waste disposal facility on their community, or pollution of rivers and lakes and so on. And so there was a lot of activity which you might have called communitarian. And so that's, to be honest, that's as far as I kind of thought the thing through.
I understand that. May I help you focus on the one word, communitarianism, and especially for the benefit of the watchers today. Anytime we see a word with this suffix ISM attached to the end of it, the first thing to realize that it simply means school of thought. And the second thing to remember, that within every school of thought, there will always be variance of opinion. That's the first thing. So we shouldn't be put off by a multisyllabic word that has this peculiar suffix that only eggheads are interested in academia, perhaps, people who study philosophy and the like. Get past that, okay? And indeed, it is a word, and a word is just a symbol. Language is roughly divided between symbology, the study of, and the signifiers and signs. That's semiotics. We have to recognize that. And communitarianism is important, again, for the very reason that this rollout of communitarian law is significant, because it impacts upon what you imagine or you were socialized to believe were your supposed rights. The first thing to recognize is that in the communitarian parlance, communitarians don't believe anybody has rights which are unaccompanied by duties and responsibilities. You have to wrestle with that. So all of these rights that you and I grew up believing that we had, like, for instance, the right to due process of law.
Yeah.
And so forth and so on, basically referencing the experience you recently had with the courts in Ireland.
Yeah. Yeah.
So people are confronting this around the world, and it's true in the States, similar to your experience. And again, your rights as an individual are balanced continuously with the supposed rights of the community at large. So there is a balancing and a harmonizing of individual rights and the rights of the community at large. And you have to ask yourself, well, who defines who the community is in any particular instance? Okay. And it's designed to be something that the average man on the street cannot possibly be qualified to wrap their minds around. And this
Yes.
too is by design, because at the end of the day, what is it that guides all of us in our actions and our activities? But it is the cultural norms, it's the attitudes, beliefs, uh, the morals, the ethics, the what is fashionable within the popular culture, the way that we were all enculturated, for instance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, but the truth of the matter is that that works in tandem with what's what is called law, and the law is made to be practically impregnable. And this is by design too. We all feel like when we need somehow clarification, we need adjudication in a court of law, we need a ruling, that we have to hire these expensive men in suits, to represent us in court and the like.
Well, that
That's
yeah.
because they're running a criminal protection racket.
Well, that's really interesting, Lark, because in the recent court proceedings, these things struck me very forcibly. That the court was really treating us derisively, in the sense that and it was said by the judge, well, you're neither doctors nor scientists. So, like, the experience that we had as human beings, as citizens, as parents, as husbands, wives, etc., was as nothing in this whole thing. And moreover, when we sought to describe in our own words the crisis that was developing outside the doors of the court, in the community, in the society, in the building up of economic catastrophe and all the attendant consequences of that to be imagined, we were told that we were making speeches and that this was of no assistance to the court, and that somehow that there was something that we were supposed to deliver. Perhaps we thought that was in the way of some kind of dry, legalistic formulation, or a translation into legalese of some kind of scientific or medical principles, which suddenly would become the substance of the issue before the court. But that speaking about it in human terms was no longer really useful or permissible or admissible. And this is really terribly frustrating, and because you can't really get to even to articulate how it is actually being operated. And it's exactly what you seem to be describing there, Lark, that this kind of the use of law, and then the use of expertise, and the limitation of the right to speak to those who know, to those who are qualified to speak, is really in its essence and already anti-democratic. It is already pushing the people to the
Well, we
margins.
have to refer back to those Club of Rome white papers from the late 60s and early 70s. These people ultimately think that democracy and democratic processes are messy, frankly, and also inefficient and unneeded.
Yes.
And this is what is happening. I mean, it's we can call this a technocratic tyranny. We can say, I think, and it's a useful way to look at it, that yes, we have a technocratic tyranny, but technocracy is the hardware. Communitarianism, though, is the software.
Yes.
And so I would encourage people to go to my website, because I've been on this one topic for 16 years, constantly trying to refine it, to make it concise, and yet comprehensive at the same time, because it is unfathomable to the average person unless they look at it from a macro sense. And you have to look at it from a macroeconomic, historical, political, cultural, all kinds of senses, you see, because as I describe it, my website, the link is below. I think Mark posted that link. I recommend people look at trust your gut. When the language is failing you, trust your gut. What does this mean? Well, the truth is that when it comes to language, and we think about the long history of language and its attachment to man, before we had oral communication in the form of symbols and signs and the like, it was when it was very primitive. What did we have? We had basically our sensations. We had, we wanted to communicate with each other better, and which is why language was even developed. But to trust your gut means that you actually are tapping into something which is much more hardwired into who we are than the language of the day. And when we recognize too that there is a specific communitarian parlance that I see is so pervasive today, and it flies right past the perception of the average person. I mean, we have in the state the tradition of the Sunday talk shows. And what I noticed when I quit watching TV some 10 years ago, that's what they were talking about. They were using communitarian parlance, what I refer to as code speak, because it's similar to Orwellian newspeak or doublethink. People have to realize that there is actually a language within diplomacy, international relations, amongst the legal scholars, sociologists, behaviorists, and the like, that is indeed communitarian. And all of these particular occupational groups, they have their own specialized language. You know, that's why I like to point out that with these Macy conferences at the end of World War II, what was their focus? Their focus was on the theory of cybernetics, and particularly from the works of people like Norbert Wiener at MIT. MIT was very instrumental in the Manhattan Project. And I like to point out, too, that from that time, these specialists were all brought together in the sciences in particular. But today, it's the social sciences, the physical sciences, and the, there's the soft and the hard sciences, the life sciences. They're all together. They're all thrown into one ball of wax. But what did they, because their language was so specialized, they couldn't communicate. And so they had to decide on what it is that they could focus on. So all of them had an interest in. They decided it would be on control. These scientists, and what was born from that was this thing called applied systems analysis. It was a brand new science. Nobody knew what it was. They had a blank slate, a tabula rasa. They could fashion it in any way, in which way they will. Okay, and we have to recognize that this reality is true today, because even the computer scientists fancy that they are scientists. You know, economic scientists, political scientists, all social scientists think that they are scientific, and that's they're so because the soft sciences and the hard sciences are just thrown together in a ball of wax.
Yeah.
And this is the reality. Unless we learn the language of our oppressors, we can't possibly fight them.
Well, it strikes me as there's a thought here which is not exactly connected with what you just said, but it's overarching the whole thing. That, we all remember the fall of the Berlin Wall, and we remember the Soviet, the Eastern European countries all one by one falling, and the communist regimes falling, and the absolute uprising of joy and deliverance that accompanied that, and great heroes emerging from that, like people like Václav Havel, and I was myself in Prague just after the revolution there, and reporting from there. And, it seemed clear to everybody. Havel used to talk about, he used to warn that the seeds of communism were already there in the West and in capitalism. And he said that, that Soviet communism was really a convex mirror image of Western conditions, that they could erupt here. And that seemed most implausible, I have to say, at the time. Now it doesn't. But the strange thing, what I'm getting to is that I would have thought that these ideas, the sense of celebration on the one hand, and the sense of taboo associated with communism, the McCarthy thing, particularly in the United States, this fear of communism, that our societies would have been profoundly inoculated against such a virus. You would have thought, to put it like that, and yet here we are.
Two thoughts, if I might interject. Number one, it's important to look at the words of Mikhail Gorbachev of the time, the fall of the Berlin Wall. In a word, he described it as a feint. A feint. It was a deception. And the other thing too is remember that amongst Marxist and socialist circles, this word capitalist is a dirty word. And we've already indicated, you indicated, indeed, that communism is a dirty word. So communitarianism is a rebranding of both.
Yes.
That's a one way to look at it. It's a rebranding of capitalism. And let's also remember that at their core, capitalists and communists share the identical objective, and that would be monopoly. They wish to push out competitors, and of course, they're interested in market share. And when we talk about mimetic warfare, what we're talking about is mind space. Which words will occupy people's minds, okay, in this meme war, okay? And this is key. Callie Lassen, who dreamt up Occupy Wall Street and sold it to George Soros, who sold it to Hillary Clinton's State Department, okay? He said whoever has the memes has the power. Well, we're not going to have the power until we get accustomed and get hip to the communitarian parlance that's being utilized against us and how cleverly it's being used against us to keep us all divided.
Yes.
You know, the truth of the matter is, if people on the left, the Antifa folks, for example, you know, came together with the people on the right, the nationalists, the patriots, if you will, okay, and realized that the language itself has been weaponized against both groups, and that the reality is that communitarianism and communitarian law would be something that nobody would like. They could finally perhaps come together and understand how they are being played. And we are being played, you know, from the it's all about, it always emanates from the money, who has it, and the law. And everybody today has a price, it seems, you know. Everybody can be bought and paid for, including Donald Trump, including Boris Johnson, including Macron. All of these people are really sock puppets. At the end of the day. They're sock puppets. They are the representative, you know, they're the ones that are, you know, paid, you know, some nominal amount of money to serve in some what's termed a public office, you know, to basically be propagandists. And I think that's what people in the States were concerned about with Donald Trump, because he was not hip to communitarian parlance. You know, this goes back to the Republican National Committee, which is the refunding arm of that organization. People don't realize, for example, the Republican National Committee, the RNC, is a member in good standing of the IDU. That's the International Democratic Union, IDU.org. Entirely communitarian. Both major political parties in the states are communitarian. It's two wings of the same phoenix bird.
Yes.
It's true in England, it's true in Ireland, it's true in Germany. It does not matter where, because we live in a time of instant communication. This technology plays a big part in what's emerging in our lifetimes, because John, you and I didn't have this technology 30 years ago at our disposal, 50 years ago. We didn't grow up with it like these younger people today, you know, and that's why it's important that older people like ourselves, I'm 65, soon 66. I know you're a bit older. You know, it's up to us to get our heads together so that we can lead the way for these younger people, because they don't have the memory of what life used to be.
No, they don't. But you're so right. I mean, the language problem is really enormous, because you know, they don't really have any memories of things that we take for granted, and they haven't been taught very well. They haven't really picked up very much, and they're also being distracted with simplistic ideas which have a certain appeal, like, you know, Black Lives Matter, or, you know, these things which are almost impossible to articulately deconstruct because they're so messy. in terms of rationality and reason. I mean, we have this problem now that Ireland didn't have any history like America's, but for all intents and purposes, the young people of Ireland regard Irish people as white supremacists in the way that they would talk about South African slaveholders or whatever. It's the same thing. It doesn't matter where you go. It's a universal language, which is a very crude understanding of history at every level. And you just, like, you would burst with frustration trying to have a conversation with a young person about any of this stuff in the conditions we find ourselves in. And all the channels are blocked. The media is completely corrupt. The academia is corrupted. YouTube is censored. So we can only get little pieces of information out. It's like a kind of a samizdat culture now by electronically, that we have to sneak these little lines of truth out to people and hope that one or two of them will stick. And it's a really formidable situation to be in. And as I say, the most extraordinary, the parallels between, the essays of Havel now, I mean, they read like, expositions of what's happening in front of us as we speak this moment, in terms of he's understand the power of the powerless, his letter to Gustav Husak, all of these essays really come into their own in here, in the West, like we never thought they would. And we have generations which, I don't know, they also appear like to suffer from some kind of, I would almost say, mental disability as a consequence of culture, or not reading or education or something like this, in which they don't seem to be able to reason, and they don't seem to be able to kind of articulate synthetic ideas, to synthesize ideas in the way that we would have taken for granted, no matter what our perspectives.
I can recommend a website. It's called invisibleserfscollar.com. Robin Eubanks is a securities attorney living with her husband, who's a software developer in Atlanta, Georgia. And she writes about education policy, but she writes about education from the framework of communitarianism, because she has an understanding of communitarianism. And she would be a woman between your age and my age, but she is a scholar. She has a book. It's entitled Credential to Destroy: How and Why Education Became a Weapon. There's also deliberatedumbingdown.com. That's Charlotte Iserby, who worked during the Reagan administration, Department of Education, and her writing partner, Anita Hogue. I've been astonished since I first stumbled upon this word, which was the first year I got online, within months, and nobody was talking about it since 2004. Since 2004. In particular, I was astonished that European peoples, like people in Ireland and England and Wales and so forth, were not talking about it, when it was just so clear that when you understood the basis of what was the law of the European Union, that it was acquis communautaire, or communitarian law. Why no discussion? And I think it's no accident that when they refer to the European Union or its law, they call it the community, or the communitarian, or the community law. Okay. And that's because you're not going to, when you do a search for these kind of things, it's difficult to find, but in the States, I know that Nikki Rapana, her and her daughter wrote the Anti-Communitarian Manifesto in 2003. They made it available for free on the internet. It's still there. They went into Wikipedia and they tried to lobby for a simple reference at the end of the entry for communitarianism in Wikipedia, in that encyclopedia, to communitarian law. And she was overridden. I copied and pasted the entire thread of the conversation, but lasted more than a week. They don't want to have that correlation. If you can't connect communitarianism to communitarian law, then your mind is disconnected and you don't see it. Because all of us are guided by two things in life: How much money do we have? And what do we need to do next? And what are we permitted to do? In a communitarian world, they have decided that, well, the biggest problem of the world and of humanity is man himself.
Yes.
Man is
Yes.
he's a pollutant. He's an irritant upon the planet. He breathes too much oxygen. We have a CO2 problem. There's too many people, and all of these things.
And as you said, and as for this democracy business, where he thinks that he can sit around discussing things and having votes and so on, wasting time in this way, like, I mean, who needs that stuff when we're trying to run the world in accordance with our own desires and needs?
Yeah, I believe that if people simply read the Anti-Communitarian Manifesto, and another book that I recommend that you can read for free. Actually, there's paywalls behind this book. It's called "They Own It All in You" by means of toxic currency. If all you did was read those two books and then go to my website and then just read through it, it'll take you less than an hour. You can divide it up 5 minutes at a time, 2 minutes at a time, 10 minutes at a time. It's up to you. I try to make it simple. Okay. Yeah. And I'm not an expert about anything. I'm simply someone that is sharing 16 years of research that's been entirely focused on this one ism and this one law. And to me, it was that significant then. It still remains significant to this day. The person that was instrumental in helping me see all of this is I owe to Nikki Rapana. Now, this is a woman who is 62 years old that lives in a yurt 250 miles north of Anchorage, Alaska, in a place that gets minus 40 degrees below zero in the winter. And she's completely off the grid. Recently, some supporters got together to send her some money so that she could buy an inverter and a battery so that she can actually get online. And because like myself, I quit writing for public consumption in 2013 because there was no traction. Nikki quit writing in her blog, which you can find to this day simply by doing a search, living outside the dialectic. Nikki and I are two people that have been on this topic and solely focused on this subject matter for some time. Nikki and her daughter discovered it in Seattle, Washington in 1999 and 2000. In 1999 and 2000, I was a business person. I had a bricks and mortars business, 35,000 square foot warehouse, 12 employees, and I was trying to do business with the city of Dallas. And I came away from that experience thinking, wow, this whole local government is run by communists. I was shocked at the level of corruption. And at the time, I had access to money. I had a good credit line. I was one of these good corporate citizens type. I wanted to be that boy that made mom and dad proud, you see. But I gave all that up at the end of 2005, beginning of January of 2006, because I saw that this was an important thing that I needed to focus on, simply because I realized that most people simply did not have the time, the energy, or the perspicacity to focus on this, because with a mortgage and with a job and with children in tow and bills to pay and all these things, who has the time?
Yeah.
And that's just, and they bank on these things, man is the most studied creature in history. Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
And these people know us. They predict our behaviors. And now they have computers, with algorithmic formulas. I tell people all the time, when it comes to language, we have to admit to ourselves how easily we can be deceived. There's such a thing as interpretation of meaning. There's words like exegesis and eisegesis and heuristics and hermeneutics and casuistry and pilpul. The average man on the street has no idea what these words mean. But you can go do a search, list of fallacies, logical fallacies. You can do a search list of common misconceptions. I mean, there is a whole laundry list this tall of all the different ways that we can be deceived. And I remember years ago, back in 2012, I'd stumbled upon this thing called a paraprosdokian saying, which is what magicians and comics, traditionally employ as a way to do a misdirect with their audience, who have ostensibly paid to see them perform, you see. But when we just take a quick glance at those things alone, we have to admit, yes, we can be deceived, and we are. And that's why I champion this idea of bringing these words to as few a word as possible in order to anchor yourself for the road ahead. Because we live in a different world today, John, than when you and I were growing up. It's it's a smaller world, and everybody loves this technology. And I am very concerned about the so-called GRIN technologies. That's an acronym, GRIN, standing for genetics, robotics, information, and nanotech. Because the watchword in all of these industries, amongst all people who are success-driven, who are careerists and opportunists and credentialists, is innovate or die. Take your piece of the pie. My dad, as a young boy, he used to say, son, eat up or go stand in the corner. He was a depression baby. We were not permitted in my home to leave a plate that was not scraped clean.
Yeah.
And remember, when we were growing up, good fences make good neighbors. What do you not discuss in polite company, but religion and politics?
Yeah.
And these are very important topics, and people do not talk about these things by and large, because we were socialized to believe that this is just going to cause dissension, conflict, problems with your neighbors, and so you just don't do such things. That's unfortunate.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's another fact. There's something of a paradox in the idea that the idea of communitarianism or communism or all these kind of collectivist ideologies, and they're probably all amongst the same thing fundamentally, but that in the present time, I mean, I find with younger people that those kind of the glues that held communities together, I mean, real communities of real people and neighbors and villages and parishes and even cities, city streets or urban streetways, that those communities, that there were certain values that underpinned them. I mean, at the macro level, you had patriotism, but there was a kind of a loyalty to your own community. It seems to me that in the modern era, those glues have been very much diluted or weakened.
And
so
that's
that
by design. That's by design. It's the same if you're an American. What kind of American do you mean? We have people that they want to discuss the law. They want to discuss the Constitution. And so, silly me, I have to say, which version?
Yeah.
Are we talking about? And the other thing too is, we had the passing recently of a Supreme Court justice. His name was Antonin Scalia.
Yes, I know of him.
He fashioned himself as an originalist, as opposed to someone who believed that the Constitution was a living document or living constitution. He was an originalist. But we find that he was invited to join the faculty of the Institute of American and Talmudic Law, IATlaw.org. We find the example of Harold Berman, who taught American law students for 60 years before he passed away a few years ago. 40 of those years at Harvard, 20 years after that at Emory University in Atlanta. And here is a Jewish man who converted to Protestantism, okay? But he, in his day, was a noted Soviet legal expert. So I include links at my website so that you can get into the mind of Harold Berman and how it is that he was able to teach American law students for 60 years in America. He was a Soviet legal expert.
Yeah.
So I'm pointing these things out. The Rand Corporation was incorporated on the very day that Israel declared its independence. LifeLog was a DARPA project, Department of Defense, that morphed into Facebook. We have to start, in my mind, I continually am making connections and connecting dots. And it's probably going to be a lifelong process, but that's why at the end of the day, if we want to learn better how to navigate this life, we need to basically have a plan. Okay? Because what I champion at the end of the day is that all of us live productive lives, happy lives, healthful lives,
Yeah.
and in the face of what we're up against, we have to realize that just like in the art of war, if we don't know this cultural, political, economic, environmental milieu in which we all navigate or try to navigate through this life, then we're going to be at a serious disadvantage.
What's your mood, Lark, about all this? I mean, do you think it's pretty dismal? Do you think it's pretty hopeless? Do you think that how could it turn? How could we awaken people?
We have to first of all learn the language of our oppressors. That's the way I see it. When I see someone on a TV screen, or when I see somebody on the computer that is essentially parroting the language of their oppressors, I'm thinking they're not being very helpful here, are they? Even though they, ostensibly are posing themselves as someone trying to help us figure our way out of this morass.
Yes.
I just don't think it's helpful. We have to become familiar. And what I can recommend is that, for example, in the Anti-Communitarian Manifesto, you can find that at the Wayback Machine, archive.org. Type in nord.nord, nord.twu.net /ACL, which stands for Anti-Communitarian League. Perhaps somebody will put a link in the chat here. But there, in the appendices at the beginning of the book, there is something called communitarian buzzwords. No, they're not communist buzzwords. They're not fascist buzzwords. They're communitarian buzzwords. And then there's another one which is actually alphabetized, listed in the appendix amongst the other appendices, and it's entitled Big Mother's Double Tongue Dictionary. You see? And then too, get familiar with that language, okay? And then look at the politicians that are trumpeted out, to speak up as to what's going on. We're going to speak to this expert and that attorney and this politician, and they're going to help us figure it all out here, okay? And listen for communitarian code speak, that modern Orwellian newspeak and doublethink that they're pointing to. Look at people like Amitai Etzioni. That's the Institute for Communitarian Policy Studies, which was established at George Washington University in 1990. This is a man who's been a special policy advisor to every American president since Jimmy Carter. Who is this man? Who is his son? Oren Etzioni, O-R-E-N. Well, he's been called the world's foremost expert on artificial intelligence. Just like his daddy has been called the everything expert by the popular press. And we know the popular press, the establishment media, the legacy media, if you will, is no friend to us already. No. But anyway, so forgive me for my rant.
No, it's very interesting. I do think it's a very important dimension, because you can certainly see the patterns that you speak of very clearly in all of these events, and there does seem to be a massive ramping up now. So I think it's
They
getting late.
consider us to be a nuisance.
Yes.
We're a nuisance for them. Okay. And I think we could be more effective, though, honestly, if we just learn their language.
Yeah, I
Then,
mean,
then we can call them out on their BS, you see.
yeah, I mean, the idea that we once had, that we had a right to be let alone by the state, by all of these busybodies, and just to live our lives as we pleased, by and large, provided we didn't break the law and so long as we paid our taxes, that's gone. They don't seem to want that now. You've got to kind of do it, everything, pay constant attention. It's like being in class all the time now. You have to pay attention, and you have to play by the rules all the time, and you can't. There's no private space. There's no private.
Yeah.
There's no privacy for yourself or for your family. It's everything is intruded upon. This is very scary. So I think you're right, Lark. We need to really start paying attention to the connections to be made between all of these things now, and that's the next phase that you spelled it out very well.
When we were growing up, John, I mean, I remember that I built a lean-to in the forest, and I was so happy. I was so proud. I must have been 10 years old. This was my fort.
Yeah.
This was my castle. I built it with my own two hands, and later on in high school, I remember reading poems like House by the Side of the Road, which in America was the single most popular poem of the 19th century. House by the Side of the Road, and just be a friend to man. This is how we imagined our lives could be. We didn't want dissension. We didn't want conflict. We wanted to be friends with everybody. We wanted to be gregarious, you see.
Yeah.
And, we would hear expressions like, I'm a lover, not a fighter,
Yeah.
But in today's world, you're right. We have no privacy. And without privacy, or privacy, however you wish to say it, you say tomato, I say tomato. That means when you don't have privacy, you have no property rights. And see, this is what the Marxists were always anxious to get rid of, is they want to disabuse us of the notion that we can own any property. And today that includes the right to ownership of our own mind, our own bodies, and even the fruits of our labor.
Yes.
And this is the enemy, if we boil it and distill it down to a nutshell. I would recommend everybody read the entry on my website called The Coalescence of Cybernetics. The American Society of Cybernetics actually provides a timeline going back into antiquity. There is something that you can search on the internet. It's called the timeline of communitarianism. These are very helpful things. When we talk about communitarian law, it is canonical, ecclesiastical, Talmudic.
Well, I think this is very important. I think that we certainly it fits. It fits. The whole thing fits.
And what we're seeing today is creative destruction. This is a basic principle of Kabbalistic thinking.
But are you optimistic? I mean, given what you see has happened to I don't know, the stupefaction really of masses of people
I think if we slow down in our minds, in our thinking, and come together with the basic questions of life, because when we study communitarianism and we oppose it, we are anti-communitarian. We don't like it, or we're contra-communitarian. What we're really talking about is life itself. We have to begin with what are our values, as individuals. At the end of the day, it is an individual choice, and it is an individual battle. We have to know who and or what is our enemy. And today, our enemy is really a system. It's an internationalist system, and it has everything to do with economics and the money and the law. And most of us we don't feel qualified to speak to these things. All we know is that we want a good life. We know that we must be greedy because, if nothing else, that unconscious act of breathing, which ties to that word spirit or spiritus, we know that that unconscious act makes us a greedy animal, if you will, because we demand that next breath of air. And
Yes.
we need, as individuals, we need the same things. Besides that next breath of air, we need potable water. We need nourishing foods. And we can see today how we've all allowed ourselves to be poisoned. All the farmlands in America, it's all been poisoned. The water's been poisoned. The air has been poisoned. And now we're allowing our minds to be poisoned too, because we consume more media than any other people in human history today.
Yeah.
I mean, we are gluttons for punishment.
We sure are. That to me, that I always think, if it were not for that, none of the other stuff would be possible.
Right.
That without the mass hypnotization of the public, it wouldn't be possible for these tyrants to have their way in the way they're having their way now, and looking like they will in the future.
John, even that word love has 6 different definitions in the Christian Bible, because it was drawn from the Greek, the Hebrew, the Aramaic. It was Latinized. But if we get out our concordance, look up the word love, what is the highest expression of love? It's agape, a perfect acceptance of all that is. Yes, we are a fallible creature. We are error prone. People of our age and our life experience, though, we need to be role models for these younger people. Those people who are 30 and 40 years old, who are knee deep in it. They've been subject to mind control, trauma-based mind control with the public education. Believe it or not, it's trauma-based. And the media today is all agitprop.
Yeah. But they've done all these clever little tricks. I mean, you mentioned there, I think a while ago, this idea of diversity. They've absolutely flipped the meaning of diversity over the past 20, 30 years.
Just like the word community.
Yeah. Because I remember actually I was reading an old book that I wrote about 25 years ago, and I was using the word diversity then in the early 90s in a certain way. And the way then was diversity of cultures, the right particularity of your culture in your own place, and the multiplicity of all such experiences then replicated in different places all over. That was diversity. Now, what diversity means is plucking people from all those places and putting them all into one place, mixing them together so that they eradicate the particularity of that place and create the same homogeneity everywhere. And it isn't even the homogeneity that's based on any one single cultural experience. It's actually something else. It's something imposed.
You might remember a film. It was entitled "The Gods Must Be Crazy." Mm-hmm. It was a story of a pygmy tribesman who was confronted for the first time by Western civilization. Somebody had dropped a candy wrapper. He'd never seen such a thing. And you can watch it, I think, for free on the internet. But people like us, I mean, we didn't have anything against that pygmy tribesman. In fact, we quite admired him. Yeah. The same for that Aboriginal in Australia, the tribes people from the Amazon. And I don't think that's what Western people are all about. It's not about that. But we are about home and hearth. Home is where the heart is, and we are connected to the land. We feel, this is critical. But see, the communitarians wish to disconnect us from all things which we previously heretofore thought of as anchors in our lives. Yes. And that's why they attack our values, our morals, and our ethics, and they redefine these words. Amitai Etzioni wrote a book called The New Golden Rule. Whatever was he talking about? Susan Blackmore, who was a person who studied meme theory and mimetic warfare, she posits that, what's the big deal about exercise of free will? This is unimportant. You have no free will.
Yeah.
This is a good thing.
Yes. Yes, everything is determined anyway. Yes, I know. But the thing here is that they have weaponized then those questions, having flipped those questions of values, of attachments, and so on, and they've turned them into reactionary concepts. And then they have turned the young against them and against anybody who dares to express them. So if you want to talk about the integrity of your own community, of your own nation, and the necessity to protect that culture, then you are a racist, etc., etc., etc. And you were attacked by the young. So you have lost all capacity to connect with the young because of what these spell words that they use: racist, xenophobe, homophobe, all of these other, which having weaponized all these areas under the aegis of cultural Marxism.
And now we're witnessing this spate of voices attacking boomers. And
Yes.
That's something that has entered my mind on several occasions over the years. They're going to pin all this on the boomers.
Yes. Yes, that's
I'm a boomer. You're a boomer. We were born since 1945, between 45 and 60.
Yes.
And so I feel like, I kind of have a mission, that the boomers were onto them.
Yeah. Maybe that's the way to go. I mean, let our contribution for the time we have left to us be to leave this place safe from these guys. And that would be a great legacy, wouldn't it?
I think so. And we have to understand that a lot of people simply are unable to speak honestly. And I have a whole list. If you do a search on the internet, Lark on communitarianism, I list the isms in a concise yet as comprehensive a manner as I know how to do, the other isms which make up this all-encompassing ism or school of thought known as communitarianism. And right there on the bottom, they're listed in no particular order: careerism, credentialism. A man who works for a collectivist entity, he's a part of. He has a contractual relationship, if you will, with a corporation, a business, a university, whatever. They can't speak out. They can't speak honestly. No. They must always show that they're a good corporate citizens, that they are loyal to the group, and that means that they are loyal to the diktats of the leadership of that group, because otherwise they compromise their ability to be able to rise within that organization, to gain status, to gain a promotion. And they can be excommunicated. They could be thrown out on their ear. I know people that wrote about 9/11 who were engineers. And in the aftermath of their writings and becoming known, their name is mud. They can't get a job anywhere.
Yeah.
And these are people that were earning comfortable six figures, simply because they spoke out about 9/11.
Yeah, it's also in relation to that is a quality of mass communications that one could not have foreseen. I don't think one could anyway. Certainly, I mean, if you think of the internet, if you were to sit back now and imagine what it was like, say, 25 years ago, before the internet really got off the ground, and say, well, what would a world in which everybody would have at their fingertips access to a common communications network, a culture, a living organic culture? You would have imagined the most spectacular things of imagination and creativity and free expression and so forth. And in actual fact, it has turned into almost the direct opposite. I mean, there are some elements of that in it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be allowed to do what we're doing now. But in general, it's something that bears down upon the people. And that process you talk about, which affects people's livelihoods, because, in terms of what they are permitted to say or think even. Also, I mean, that has the internet somehow, it permeates everything to the extent that even among one's own group, friends, in a coffee shop, in a bar.
Oh my.
We are changed by it. We are censored already. We are, our mouths are as though stitched up in certain respects. because there are certain things we cannot utter, or if only by code. We have to check each other out. Is it safe? Is it safe? It's like that. Remember that line in the Marathon Man?
We can't go to a
safe?
park to watch the ducks without our smartphones.
Yes.
We can't go into a restaurant. We can't go into a restaurant without our smartphones. The entire family sitting there looking at their.
That's right.
It's scary.
And we're prepared to trade our most fundamental, precious qualities, as you say, privacy, our rights, our individual freedoms, the right to free association, to free speech. We're prepared to trade all of these for more and more technological baubles. Who would have foreseen this? That if you could offer people a deal, that they would trade off such things, and that they would trade them off for such simplistic, I suppose conveniences is the best. It's the strongest.
And this is the most sophisticated surveillance and espionage tool ever devised, John. I mean, I think of a digital panopticon. I think of Jeremy Bentham, the father of utilitarianism, who commissioned this idea, this drawing of an ideal prison, which required very few guards because of the way it was laid out and designed. We are willingly volunteering ourselves into what I call techno-slavery. Yes. And I tell people that the landscape that we're all navigating, this what we call life, is dominated by this thing called depopulation, because there is a twofold agenda to this communitarian global system. And there's two words: depopulation, which is a euphemism for total war. And that's every kind of warfare that you can imagine that's not necessarily the shoot 'em up, bang, bang, bombs dropping in the air type of war. Yes. Okay. And secondly is this phenomenon of techno-slavery. We are volunteering ourselves into techno-slavery. And I defined a technology as a tool. Granted, a tool is a technology is a tool. And like all tools, they can be wielded for good or for ill. Imagine an axe and a gun, but also imagine a rock, a stick, a spear, a lever, an anvil, a fulcrum. Yeah. And now we have this technology today, and we have just all willy-nilly entered into a contractual arrangement with our internet service providers that we are all good with this idea that we can be surveilled, and I for one do not think there is any privacy whatsoever, although security seems to be a very strong industry today. Cybersecurity, everybody wants security. And by the way, integral to communitarian law is this concept known as R2P, or responsibility to protect.
Yeah.
Okay. And that was championed by Samantha Power, who was the former President Obama's appointee to the United Nations to be the U.S. ambassador. And she's married to a man named Cass Sunstein. And Cass Sunstein was part of the panel. Look it up on YouTube. The Constitution in 2020.
Yeah, and you see the I suppose the cutting edge of this is that we're within 5 to 10 years of a situation where I might decide, well, I don't want to get vaccinated for COVID-27, so one day I go out to my self-driving car and press the button, and the door closes, and I instruct my car to go to the gym or something, and it said it turns left and goes to the hospital. It drops me off, and their security guard, they take me in and they vaccinate me, and then I'm allowed to go back into my car and go home. Like, I don't think people have any. It's only in recent almost months that these things started to crystallize for me. I mean, I had the general shapes in my head for some time, but really, when you see what's in train in China with social credit schemes and so on, and it's clear that they want to implant those models now on Western society. It's much later than we think, isn't it?
It's incumbent upon people like us. The world needs the wisdom of John Waters. Okay, it needs the wisdom of John Waters, but it's going to be very helpful if John Waters can have honest discussions. And I talk about this radical honesty. And I talk about futilitarianism at my blog. I mean, they're just big words. Okay, you can get past them. And when you recognize that for any definition, for any word, there's a whole lot of words which can be attached that you wouldn't ordinarily attach. We have to become aware of that. But people like Mark Windows and Gemma, we need to be reaching across the pond and having honest discussions, and learn from each other, because we can. And that, I think, is the great lesson in life, that we can learn from everyone that we encounter. We are at once students and teachers.
Agreed.
All of us. And this is how the golden rule works best, I think, in this world. I don't need Amitai Etzioni to discuss his application of the new golden rule. I understand intrinsically what the golden rule is, because I grew up in this country. We all understood what the golden rule was. I don't need some egghead who's born in Germany and raised in Palestine and then Israel, and got a PhD in California in Berkeley in 1958 to tell me what the golden rule is.
No,
you see,
no. We need to make our own golden rules and to rediscover and reinvent the age-old principles that we've been talking about, of freedom and of genuine community and genuine solidarity, and to take our language back from these people who have corrupted it, and then turn it, in effect, into those slogans on the gable wall at Balmoral Farm. I mean, that's essentially what almost every sentence coming out of the mouth of a politician now, and I hear exactly what you say, is as though from that wall, it's where that no one is left behind, no one left behind. I mean, well, the image that comes into my head when I hear that is an image of a paddy wagon, and no one is left behind. And that's the way we need to start talking to people about this stuff.
I think so, and I think that when I personally think that we, for people to have the time to look into it, because it does take some time, if we understand the language of our oppressors, and then we can call them out every time they employ that language, because the language is intended to deceive. Okay, it's intended as a misdirect, to point us in the directions that we shouldn't be going, instead of focusing where we ourselves intend to focus. These people are, they're playing magic tricks. Okay.
Yes.
And the truth is, today, sadly, a lot of people in this world are communitarians that never heard of the word. And we're talking about high-level politicians too, political appointees. They are communitarians because they don't know that they have been assigned a label that they're unaware of. In fact, there's something that you can do, anyone can do watching. They can type in communitarianism, first things first. Take you about 10 minutes to read it, if that, and go through it and look at the quotes. And one of my quotes is about the problem of the world as being the yous. Now, who are the yous? The yous are spelled Y-O-O, little letter S. Okay, there is the problem of the U. That's the E-W-E-U. There's the problem of the J-E-W, pronounced U. And then there's the problem of the capital Y-O-U-U. And all U's, Y-O-O, known collectively, are communitarians. A ewe, what is a ewe but a female sheep? They're sheared, they're milked, they're finally led to slaughter. You don't want to be one of those yous, sheeple, if you will. And then the JEW, pronounced you, like YEW, is of a people apart. A separate species altogether, according to some. Well, see, they're victimized just like the EWEs, U's. And then you have the vaunted good corporate citizen, you know, the capital YOU, you know, these are all U's, but collectively they're YOOUs, and all U's are communitarians. When you wrap your mind around that, you have to ask yourself, well, wait a minute, this is not how I think of myself. Yeah. I certainly don't want to think of myself as a slave or someone that's being milked and sheared before I'm led to slaughter. You know, I do not have the final say-so about how I direct my hands, my eyes, my mouth, my feet. Wait a minute. You know, who decides? Who's the final arbiter at the end of the day? And all of us have overlooked these questions for so long in our lives because, after all, we are an agreeable creature. We don't see any profit in creating dissension everywhere we go because, after all, we're trying to be successful. We want to be well-liked. You know, we want to have a comfortable lifestyle.
Yeah, that's right. Well, that's the way I've always felt, and I always kind of felt that generally was the purpose of politics and the impetus of politics. Now it's not that at all, and I'm not sure when that crept into it, but it has certainly even reached Ireland now, and that's it's no longer a foreign problem. You know, it's no longer an external problem. It's right here, and if it's here, it's everywhere.
We're in a war. We're in a war, and my mission in life at this moment is I do not want to see people hurt. Period. I don't want myself to be hurt. And I don't think we can win this war because we are engaged in war, whether we like it or not, whether we realize it or not, as long as we have one hand tied behind our back. So we may think that we know ourselves and we know what our own intentions are, but if we don't know the intentions of this system, the people that are attached to this system, you know, who, you know, frankly, use the language of communitarian code speak almost religiously, because this is how they're indoctrinated. This is how they're trained. This is how these politicians rise. Okay. The more they become accustomed to the language of communitarian parlance are the people that they want to elevate. And it's designed to deceive. It's designed to keep the people, frankly, in the dark and untethered from their moorings, their foundations, everything that they once thought essential to how it is they live their life. Remember, to get rid of to usher in the new world order, they have to destroy creatively the old world order.
Yes. Well, that's well in train now. So we got to stop it. We got to draw a line somewhere, and no further. This far, no further, and then start to work our way back.
Yeah, I love meeting people like you, people that I admire, and I've watched. Believe it or not, this American in Texas has followed your work for a few years now.
Oh,
we've never met, but you know, I have a way, like we all do. We attach ourselves to people that we admire, and people that are doing things in a similar manner or way, using similar means as ourselves, how we would approach things. And you know, my idea is that we have mastermind sessions just like we're having today, and we come together and we discuss strategy, because, you know, with our time and grade in this life, you know, we have the right to be generals now, and we should be talking strategy. Well, how do we get this message out? How do we fight? How do we win? How do we win?
Yeah. Yes, that's exactly it. What have we got to lose? You know, I mean, that's all we have to do now, really, Lark. You know, I mean, it's this is our job. This is our vocation. This is our mission.
Yes.
And I say that when the time comes to shuffle off this mortal coil, we can say, well, we made a good go. We made a good go of it, and the world is getting to be in a better place now. and
Oh,
that's all we can.
we have opportunities for change in a place like Ireland compared to a place like the U.S. More so because of the difference in the size and the number of peoples. You know.
Yeah, it's a mixed blessing. I mean, in the sense that I mean, in a certain sense, Ireland is part of the US, and it's almost a 51st state because of the corporate influences and other factors. But also because it is so small, it lends itself to easy manipulation and being used as a kind of a trophy country. That they can do something here so spectacularly that particularly Ireland being nominally a traditional Catholic country, they can present it into the world as evidence that little old stupid Ireland has kind of caught up. What are you guys doing? When are you going to start getting your act together? And that works. I mean, I think that had a big effect in America on the Supreme Court there when we legalized gay marriage in 2015 as a result of an amendment or a referendum. A couple of months later, the Supreme Court of the United States went the same way, and I'm not certain that, I don't know, but I have a hunch that it wouldn't necessarily have gone that way if we hadn't made that gesture.
I want you to know that there was a woman living in Alaska near her daughter who's in her 30s. She has 4 children. We were watching that Irish referendum. And I remember, you can go to her blog, because Americans love the Irish. We do.
Yeah, I know that. Yes, I know that. I know, and we love them. We love Americans too. I mean, many of us do anyway. Not everybody, at the moment, especially, but we do. But that was a kind of it's a hard thing to explain. It's a long, because there's a big history behind all of these phenomena, as you know. And but going back to what we were saying earlier, these are part of the distractions, in a sense, the misdirection. That this is what the left hand is doing while the right hand is doing the real business, but in doing that, they cause all kinds of other ruptures and damage that is not even allowed to be talked about.
They have to collapse this economic system because the numbers aren't working for them anymore, because they've been in the States, they've been running a Ponzi scheme for more than 100 years, know, and I think this is what's behind it all. But we can go back further in time, to the creation of the United Nations and then the League of Nations before that. I know that I admit to myself today that I got the education of a slave. And I was actually a pretty good student as a younger fellow. By the time I got in junior high or high school, I started to see through a lot of the nonsense. And I remember even going to college. I think I dropped out at the beginning of my 3rd year because I felt like I was being, frankly, indoctrinated.
Yeah.
And I was there to learn something. I didn't want to learn about business law. Wait a minute, I've got my own law.
Yeah.
You see?
I think so. I agree. I mean, I didn't go to school very much at all, and I think that was one of the great blessings of my life.
It probably was.
I don't think I ever completed a full week in school. I did 2 or 3 days at a time, maybe at the best of times. And, and I think also the fact that I grew up in a house that didn't have TV until I was well into my 20s, I think it was important, just things like that. It's a strange thing to say that actually by not having experiences in the modern world, you're probably better off. One would think in general that experiences are better. But actually, those kind of education now, I think it's become such a damaging thing for young people. It imprisons them in rigid forms of thinking, and they're so terrified of being disapproved of by their peers that they can't think straight, can't think at all. And TV, of course, just simply tops that up every night for everybody, so that's kind of, again, what we're up against. It's formidable. You can see it really strongly now, where you're dealing with, I think, and I've written about this, that in our, you can see it very clearly, that actually what has been going on for the last 3 months, 4 months here in Ireland is really a form of mass hypnosis, that the use of fear in order to bring people to a certain pitch of susceptibility to thought impressions has been remarkable, and people actually are, they're very strange now. It's you can see it in people.
I have had entertained fantasies of everybody pitching their tellies and sticking them out on the curb.
Yeah.
And nobody voting. We're done. Nobody buying big city newspapers any longer.
Yeah.
And anybody that advertises on the telly and at these websites like CNN or BBC, they become enemies of the people. I mean, I've entertained those kinds of fantasies, but we're not going to ever get down to brass tacks and have honest dialogues so long as we're allowing these people to frame the narrative for how to have conversations and discussions. You know, I mean, I know myself, this whole COVID-19 stuff was complete nonsense. And then I quickly discovered that it was faked.
Yes.
It was faked. And I have known about Bill Gates since the 80s because I used to be a chef by trade and a restaurateur until 1994. And he was a regular customer at a restaurant where I was employed as executive chef, just a few miles from Microsoft. I haven't liked this man since the 80s. I never trusted him. I read about his family, his background. And when you read about these powerful people that are always in the news, invariably, every time you read about their background, well, wait a minute, Bill Gates' daddy was a eugenicist. And so I have an entry at my website about eugenics and so-called eusociality, EU sociality. So it's the highest form of social organization according to these people. And another entry, when we talk about grabbing hold as few a word as possible to act as an anchor in for our lives, for how we direct our actions and our activities, I would recommend just read 9 words because, I believe it can be taught to a 5-year-old. These are all the things that we have forgotten that we wanted out of this life when we were very young and that we dreamed about and we were hopeful for. We can still have these things, but we have to get back to brass tacks and we have to realize what's important to us as individuals. Don't give a damn about what the BBC or CNN or Fox says. These people are not my heroes. These people that are paid $500,000 a year or $10 million a year, I don't care. They're not my heroes. In our school in America, we had Dick and Jane primers when I was growing up. And, there was Puff, there was Spot, there was Dick and Jane, and there was Mom and Dad. And who was my hero but Zeke Boniface? He was the guy that picked up everybody's trash. I love that guy because, man, somebody had to do it. And Zeke was the coolest guy on the block.
Well, I think it's getting near time for that moment, that Peter Finch moment, where we go to the upstairs window, open it up and shout at the top of our voice, we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore.
Yep. And I'm with you on that. But let's fight it. Let's fight intelligently and let's call our oppressors out because we're onto them. We're hip to their own training.
Well, we gotta keep going. We've got to bring these things together now and focus and make sure that we understand completely what we're dealing with. So it's been great to talk to you, Lark.
Yeah, absolutely. I enjoyed it very much, and thank you very much to Mark for bringing us together. I've been watching you. I've been watching you for a few years, John. You're a great man.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. I think it's one of our best streams ever, and it really worked excellently tonight. So everyone out there, I haven't got that much more to say apart from stop being gaslit by all media and government. Learn the language of your oppressors, understand the system that you're in, go to Lark's website, go to windowsontheworld.net, follow what Gemma and John are doing in Ireland and support them because we're all doing the same thing in a slightly different way. But we all now have a grasp of what we are really meant to be doing. And I think this is one of our best streams ever. So thanks, Lark and John. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mark.
Really
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you very much.
I'll be back on Monday on RBN, Republic Broadcasting Network. I'm filling in for Mike Rivero. They actually twisted my arm, and it's a 2-hour show, 3 p.m. UK time. So if you're around, John or Lark, do come on. And I'd love to do this again more, because this is the sort of information that really needs to get out there. And it's the sort of information I've been trying to push out. Lark, you've got such precision with this issue. I've been covering it and trying to get it over in this sort of global to local respect, how it goes into local councils in this country, trying to give it people a front end bit of kind of prima facie evidence of how it all works, and then get people more into the whole of what you're talking about. So thanks for your work, and thanks for everyone who's listened, and do share this, because I think it's one of the most important things that people who are awake to anything at the moment need to listen to. It's the subtleties and the nuancing that's gone on tonight. I think it's been fantastic, and two great minds. Really pleased that we got this out. So thanks to Lark and John, and I'll see you all on Winners on the World on Sunday, 9:30 p.m. Okay, thanks a lot, everyone.
Nice.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.